Before she learned to growl, she was taught to beg. Lindiwe had not always been silent, but silence had become her safest shield. When her parents died in a fire that swallowed their home in the dead of night, only ash remained, ash, and the smell of something that wasn't just wood. The villagers said it was a tragedy, and tragedy, in their eyes, was a thing that came and went like bad rain. No one questioned why her uncle's wife, Mama Nalika, took her in so quickly, nor why the girl no longer spoke. Mama Nalika lived at the edge of the village, her compound fenced with dry thorn branches and buzzing with fat flies. Inside, the walls sweated grease. She had 2 daughters, Bull and Tando, both spoiled with sweet porridge and goatskin shoes. Lindiwe, on the other hand, was given a space beneath the animal shed where the dogs slept. Her pillow was a sack stuffed with feathers that poked through like thorns. At night, the stink of fleas and damp fur curled around her like a blanket. The bowl she ate from was dented metal, the same one the dogs licked clean before it was passed to her. She never resisted. What could she say? The fire had stolen not just her home, but something deep in her throat, a will that had no place in Mama Nalika's house. Days were long. Lindiwe swept, fetched water, ground maize, and washed the family's undergarments. If she made a mistake, a slap came. If she was too quiet, a curse. At meals, the family sat on low stools and laughed as they ate, and Lindiwe sat in the corner near the dog pile. The worst nights were when guests visited. Then, they made her eat in front of them. Mama Nalika would grin wide, motioning with a hand, "Look, she loves the dogs. She eats with them like she's one of them." Lindiwe didn't speak. She didn't cry. But her silence was not empty, it grew roots inside her. There were 5 dogs on the compound. Most barked at everything, even wind. But there was one, Mbwa, old, slow, with cloudy eyes and a torn ear. She watched Lindiwe without moving, her gaze steady, like she remembered something. When Lindiwe was first thrown among them, Mbwa didn't bark. She just lay beside her. The next night, when another dog growled at the girl over a scrap of meat, Mbwa bit its leg until it whimpered away. From then on, no dog challenged her. Mbwa guarded her at night, curling her long bony frame around Lindiwe like a wall. They never spoke, not in words. But Lindiwe whispered to her, and Mbwa's eyes blinked slow, understanding. People in the village whispered, too, mostly women with heavy water pots or elders with bitter tongues. They said it was a sin, the way that girl was treated. That no child should be made to eat off the ground like a beast. That maybe it was Lindiwe's mother who cursed the house before she died. But none of them stepped beyond the fence. No one knocked on the gate. It was easier to pity from afar. Lindiwe noticed things. She noticed that the dogs barked at the daughter Tando every time she wore red. That they only ate meat if she touched it first. That Mbwa would stare at the moon and growl softly, low in her throat, every time Mama Nalika slaughtered a chicken. And the girl watched, even when her stomach cried, even when her knees bled from scrubbing. She watched and she remembered. One afternoon, as she returned from the river with a heavy pot, she passed by an old neighbor, a hunched woman with gray eyes and fingers like roots. The woman called her softly. "Lindiwe. Girl." She turned, startled. Few people said her name anymore. The woman looked at her for a long time, then dug into the folds of her wrapper and pulled out a small, round gourd tied with twine. Its surface was dark and shiny, but etched with lines that shimmered in the sun. "For the dogs," the woman said. Lindiwe reached for it with trembling hands. "No one must see," the old woman added, voice low. "It feeds more than hunger." She pressed it into Lindiwe's palms and walked off, leaving the girl with a pulsing silence. That night, after everyone had eaten and the fire had died down, Lindiwe lay next to Mbwa in the dust. The dogs were restless, shifting and sniffing the air. Her fingers curled around the gourd tucked into her wrap. It was warm, almost like a heart. She didn't open it. Not yet. She buried it behind the dog shed, beneath a rock that was always warm no matter how cool the night grew. She didn't know why, but something in her bones told her to wait. Mbwa nudged closer, licking the side of her face softly before resting her chin on Lindao's ankle. In the distance, a hyena cried, a sound too much like laughter. Lindao's eyes stayed open, staring at the stars until they blurred. And though her face remained still, her thoughts were loud with questions she couldn't speak. She was no longer just hungry. She was starting to wonder what it meant to be fed. And somewhere in the dark, the gourd waited, quietly, like teeth beneath a smile. Lindau no longer flinched when they laughed. Bull and Tando, wrapped in silks and smugness, made a game of humiliating her. Each evening after the family ate, they would toss bones at her feet with exaggerated flicks of the wrist, as if feeding an unwanted stray. Sometimes they smeared the bones in ash or sour milk, giggling as Lindau bent wordlessly to collect them. It was never enough food to satisfy, just enough to insult. Other times, they'd lock her outside the gate, forcing her to curl beneath the granary with the dogs, shivering through the cold night air, her stomach folding in on itself. "You bark yet, little dog?" Bull would ask through the door, mimicking a growl. But Lindau didn't bark. She watched. She learned. The dogs had their own language. Their movements were deliberate, their reactions precise. One lifted its head a second before someone approached. Another always sat in front of the granary door before rain came. They barked differently for strangers, for chickens, for lies. And then there was Mbwa. Still, silent, watchful. Her cloudy eyes followed every movement, and when Lindai whispered to her, even just breathless syllables in the dark, Mbwa's ears would twitch, and the other dogs would respond. It started small. One night, Lindai whispered, "Stay." All 5 dogs lay flat on their bellies until dawn, unmoving. Another night, she whispered, "Don't bark," and when the drunk neighbor stumbled past the gate, they didn't raise a single sound. The next morning, Tando asked, "Why didn't the dogs bark last night?" And Mama Nalika said nothing, only stared at Lindau from across the fire, her eyes narrowed. That day, as Lindau ground maize beneath the sun, her mind drifted back to a time before the fire, before the ashes. She remembered her father's hands, calloused, cracked, and always warm. He was not a man of many words, but his silence had strength. One night, when the wind rattled the windows and the oil lamp flickered low, he knelt beside her bed and placed something into her palm. "Never remove this," he said. "Not unless you wish to be someone else." It was an amulet, bone-white, shaped like a fawn, with strange etchings carved along its curve. He tied it around her neck with a red cord. The memory had been buried beneath grief, but now, she could feel its shape pressing faintly against her chest, tucked beneath her rags. She had worn it every day since. Even when Mama Nalika stripped her of her clothes and dignity, the amulet remained hidden, untouched, as if the universe itself had made it invisible. But something inside it had begun to wake. It happened on a day of burning heat, when the wind was thick with flies and patience ran thin. Mama Nalika found Lindau resting beside the dogs instead of scrubbing the cooking stones. Without a word, she dragged her by the arm to the back of the hut. There, in a rusted tin bowl, was a heap of raw meat, red, glistening, and buzzing with flies. "Eat," she hissed. Lindau stared. "Eat it." From the bowl. "Like your friends." Tando and Bull stood nearby, laughing behind their hands. Lindau didn't move. Mama Nalika grabbed a fistful of the raw meat and shoved it toward her mouth. Some fell, some smeared across her chin. "You'll eat what you are," she spat. The dogs watched. Mbwa growled, a low sound, deep and unnatural. That night, the house was too quiet. Bull tossed in her sleep, her limbs twitching. Her breath came in gasps, and then she screamed, sharp, unfiltered terror. "I can't, they're biting me. Get them off me." She flailed wildly, knocking over a stool and kicking her sleeping mat across the room. Mama Nalika rushed in, torchlight shaking, only to find her daughter clawing at her own arms, tears streaking her cheeks. "They're chewing me," she sobbed. "They were chewing my legs." But when the room was examined, nothing was there, no dogs, no marks. Just her bed, twisted and damp with sweat. "Sleep," Mama Nalika commanded, voice thin. "It's a dream." But in the morning, as the sun cracked over the village rooftops, they found more than just a disturbed mat. Bull's bed sheet was torn along the edges. Claw marks, thin and curved, ran along the wooden legs of her bed. And there, on the floor near her pillow, was a damp, dark stain. It smelled faintly of blood. The girl was untouched, her skin whole. But her eyes told another story, wide, glazed, and forever watching corners. She didn't eat breakfast. Lindiao, crouched in the corner with the dogs, picked at the bone they'd thrown her the day before. The dogs circled her slowly, their ears back, their eyes alert. She whispered a word under her breath, not one she'd ever learned, but one that had come to her in sleep. The dogs froze. Then one barked, just once. And the others bowed their heads. From the corner of the courtyard, Mama Nalika watched her. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the girl beneath the table had teeth after all. The dust was dry that season, clinging to everything, the trees, the huts, the throats of those who had nothing kind to say. And in the dust, Lindiao walked with steps too quiet, eyes too steady. Her hands were rough now, not just from work, but from something beneath her skin beginning to rise, slow and certain. It was behind the shed where she found it. She hadn't been looking, not really. The earth there was cracked and loose, as if something had once been disturbed but not put back right. She dug without tools, only fingers, moved by an urge she couldn't name. The dog stood behind her, watching. Half a foot down, her knuckles scraped against something smooth. She cleared the dust with care. It was a skull, unmistakably canine, bleached but whole, its fangs sharp even in death. Lindiao didn't flinch. She lifted it like a priestess handling relics, brushing away dirt, eyes wide. There were carvings along the top, spirals, marks that pulsed even though the bone was cold. That night, she placed the skull beside her sack pillow and lay down next to it. Mbwa curled around her legs. The other dogs stood in a circle just beyond, their heads low, as if guarding more than a girl. By morning, the compound's chickens refused to enter the dog yard. The goats bleated and shied away from the hut entirely. Even the flies kept their distance from Lindiao's sleeping place. Something had shifted, quiet but strong. It was no longer just her silence that unnerved. It was the stillness around her, the sense that the air near her listened. The daughters began to whisper too. Tando rolled her eyes, pretending not to care. But Bull grew pale. Her cheeks lost their pinkness, her shoulders hunched when dogs barked in the distance. She began covering her ears when they howled at night, trembling like a leaf caught in the wrong season. Soon, the fever came. First, it was sweat. Then shivers. She sat up at night, wide-eyed, afraid to close her eyes. There in the shadows, she whispered once to her sister. "They walk on two legs. They have fur for faces." Tando scoffed, but she didn't sleep in the same room again. On the third night, Bull screamed again, louder than before. "I see them. They're under the bed, they want me to bark like her." Mama Nalika stormed into the room with a gourd of bitter tea and slapped her daughter hard. "You shame yourself," she snapped. "You shame me." She turned to look at the girl crouched silently near the fire, surrounded by her pack. "Enough," Mama Nalika said. She dragged Lindiao by the wrist, not to the dog shed, not to the kitchen, but to the old tree near the fence. The tree was gnarled and bitter, long stripped of fruit. Its branches curled like claws. She tied Lindiao to it with a rope soaked in oil, tied across her waist and wrists. "Sleep here. Let the dogs watch you," she said. "Maybe they'll teach you how to behave." The dogs followed. Mama Nalika raised her hand. "Back," she hissed. "Back to your place." But none moved. Not even a blink. She stepped back. Lindiao stood quietly, back against the bark, arms bound to her sides. She didn't look afraid. Only watchful. By the time the sky bled orange and purple, the dogs had taken positions. Mbwa lay directly in front of her. The others formed a loose circle. They didn't sleep. They didn't make a sound. The moon rose full and white. And still they sat. The night stretched long. Clouds passed slowly across the stars. Crickets fell silent. Even the wind came soft, barely touching the tree leaves. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Linda whispered. Not to anyone near, not to the dogs, not to the tree. To the air. To something that might have been waiting. Teach me, she said. Her voice was dry, cracked from days of dust and silence. Teach me to be more than a girl. Her breath misted even though the air was warm. Bois tilted her head, tail motionless. Something stirred behind the tree, a sound not made by beast or man, like dry leaves folding themselves into shapes. The amulet around her neck pulsed once, faintly. Linda looked down. The fawn-shaped bone glowed, not with fire, not with light, but with something deeper, something from below the earth. A soft green shimmer crawled along the etchings her father once told her never to forget. They moved like veins, like memory, like promise. She felt her heartbeat slow. And then she smiled, not cruelly, not proudly. Just enough to show that something inside her had finally heard her voice. Somewhere far off, a hyena laughed. But the dogs didn't move. And neither did she. Linda waited until the moon was at its highest. The village was silent, too silent, and that kind of stillness often meant something was about to wake. She rose from her mat quietly, careful not to disturb the sleeping bodies of the dogs curled around her. Bois' eyes opened the moment Linda moved, her head rising, ears alert but calm. Linda nodded once, and Bois stood, tail flicking. Together, they crept behind the dog shed to the stone where Linda had buried the strange gourd weeks ago. The rock felt warmer than before, almost like flesh. She dug with her fingers, lifting the object free. The twine was still intact, but the gourd had grown darker, as though it had been steeped in ink. It pulsed faintly in her hands, a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the neck of the gourd, and she whispered, "Now." The twine slipped free. The top of the gourd slid open, and a smell rose, not rotting, not sweet. Something ancient. Like smoke and wet leaves and old teeth. Inside, she saw a pool of black liquid. It didn't reflect light. It swallowed it. Floating in the center was a single tooth, thick, yellowed, shaped like a curved dagger. The gourd jumped in her hands, just once. She didn't drop it. Bois stepped closer, lowering her head to peer into it. She didn't growl. She didn't flinch. Linda tipped the gourd forward slightly, watching the black liquid swirl without touching the edges. She didn't drink it. But some part of her wanted to. That night, she placed the gourd beside her, curling around it like a stone egg. Sleep took her fast and deep. She opened her eyes in a forest she didn't know. The trees stretched tall as hills, their bark black and glistening, as if it bled sap that had dried 1,000 times. The moon above was too close, its light silver and shaking. Wind moved through the leaves in patterns that sounded like chanting. Between the trees, shadows moved, fast and many-legged. Then she saw them. Not dogs. Not men. Something in between. They walked upright but hunched, with paws for feet and long fingers that curled around spears made of jawbones and braided fur. Their faces were masked with bark and bone, but their eyes burned red. They moved in silence, yet Linda could hear their growling, low, in her ears, like a heartbeat in a cave. They surrounded her, forming a circle. She did not speak. She didn't need to. One stepped forward. It was not like the others. Taller. Slower. It wore no mask. Its head was furred, and its face was that of a hound, but aged, wise and heavy with memory. At first, she thought it would speak. But it opened its mouth and howled, and the sound curled through the forest like a call. Then she appeared. A woman stepped out from the space behind the trees. But where her eyes should have been, there were only stitched shadows. She wore a robe of matted fur and woven reeds, and bones clinked at her waist like wind chimes. She walked barefoot, though the ground was covered in thorns. She stood before Lindiwe and tilted her head. "They fed you like a beast," she said, voice like dry leaves brushing stone. Lindiwe opened her mouth to speak, but her tongue felt different. Thicker. Rough. "So," the woman whispered, "feed them what beasts deserve." The woman reached forward and touched the amulet at Lindiwe's neck. And Lindiwe woke. Her breath came ragged, chest rising like a creature that had run for hours. Her throat itched. Her skin burned. She sat up slowly. Her hands were sore. Her fingernails, longer. Sharper. Tipped in black. She touched them, pressing one into her palm. It cut. The dogs surrounded her, but none barked. Mbwa sat directly in front of her, ears alert, head tilted. Lindiwe whispered something. She didn't know what it meant, but it came from inside her like a chant. The dogs stood. Not one moved until she stood too. From that night forward, the dogs began waiting for her. Not waiting like pets. Waiting like soldiers. She fed them each morning, but now, she added something else to their bowls. A drop. Just one. The black liquid from the gourd. She dipped a sliver of wood into it and stirred it into the food. The liquid vanished instantly, no trace. The dogs licked their bowls clean, and their eyes gleamed more each day. Mbwa changed the fastest. Her limp vanished. Her fur darkened, grew thick and sleek. Her ears twitched even at the sound of insects. She began to move like something that remembered being feared. At night, they didn't curl around Lindiwe anymore. They sat, circling her sleeping body like sentinels. Their eyes always glowed. One evening, she walked into the compound while Mama Nalika and her daughters were eating, and the dogs followed her, step for step. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Tando looked away first. Bull dropped her spoon. Mama Nalika stared hard, mouth tightening. The air felt thick. Lindiwe crouched in the corner and whispered something to Mbwa. Just a sound. Mbwa turned her head toward the family. And one of the other dogs, a scrappy, narrow-eyed mutt, twitched its ears and opened its mouth. It didn't bark. It spoke. Just one word. Soon. The morning sun rose high and hot, making the dust shimmer like silver ghosts along the paths. Inside the compound, tension hummed like a string stretched too tight. Mama Nalika barked orders with unusual urgency, slapping bowls onto mats and shouting for more firewood. Today was important. A visiting chief from across the river was coming, a man of wealth and wide influence, rumored to be seeking a new wife for his eldest son. Mama Nalika's eyes had gleamed for weeks at the thought. Everything had to be perfect. The pots were scrubbed clean, the fire stacked high, and the cooking stones blackened with thick meat fat. No vegetables were prepared, only meat, as the chief's clan was known for disdaining greens. 3 goats had been slaughtered, each limb marinated in secret spices. Sizzling flesh filled the air. In the yard, Lindiwe sat quietly beside Mbwa, watching smoke curl from the cooking hut. Lindiwe! Mama Nalika snapped from behind a pile of skewered ribs. Go prepare the dog's bowl. They won't eat scraps today. But Lindiwe didn't move. For the first time, she remained still. The air around her shifted, subtle as a breath held too long. Mama Nalika frowned. Did you hear me? I did. The response was soft, but full. Her voice had weight now. And why are you still sitting like some bush spirit? Mama Nalika marched toward her, hand raised. Move, or I'll teach your mouth silence again. Lindiwe stood, and Mbwa rose beside her. I won't feed them today, she said. What? I said I won't feed them. Not today. Not like before. The silence that followed was thick and strange, like rain that never falls. Then, slap. Mama Nalika's palm cracked across Lindiwe's face, sharp and full of pride. It echoed. And then, without warning, all 5 dogs barked. Once. At the same time. The sound was thunderous, a perfect, unnatural harmony that shook the rafters. It rang out across the yard and down the path. Chickens scattered, flapping and squawking in blind panic. A tied goat broke free, screaming into the trees. The wind itself seemed to drop low, curling at Lindio's ankles like a frightened child. Mama Nalika stepped back, heart racing. Lindio didn't flinch. She turned and walked back to her mat. The dogs followed. That night, the feast began under the orange glow of lanterns. The visiting chief and his retinue sat on woven mats laid with gourds of sour beer and roasted goat, steam rising from metal platters. The meat had crisped beautifully, brown on the outside, glistening in the heat. But something was off. The smell was too strong. The dogs didn't move from Lindio's side. Not even to sniff the meat. Mama Nalika laughed too loudly, serving the guests herself. Bull and Tando sat in brightly patterned dresses, faces painted, smiles forced. The chief took his first bite. Chewed. Paused. Said nothing. Others began eating. Then frowning. Then coughing. The meat looked roasted, but inside, it was slick. Still red. Still bleeding. Bones had cracked as if freshly broken. One of the men spat into a napkin, revealing a shard of goat horn, still soft. Bull gagged. She bent forward, coughing hard, retching into her lap. When she opened her mouth again, a sliver of bone dropped from her lips. "What is this?" she gasped. "What is happening?" The chief rose, disgusted, wiping his mouth with a piece of cloth and stormed from the compound. His guards followed. Mama Nalika tried to stop them, words tumbling from her mouth. "Wait, it must be a mistake, the butcher." But no one listened. The dogs stood as one. Their eyes burned in the firelight. Lindio stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her arms. She simply said, "They've tasted what you eat." She paused, letting the words hang like fog. "Now you'll taste what they crave." Mama Nalika stared, lips trembling. Then Tando vomited. Not food, blood. Just a thin stream. Her eyes rolled white, and she collapsed beside the pot. Bull fell to her knees, trembling, her voice breaking. "Please, please, Lindio. Stop this. Make them stop. I'll be kind. I swear it." She crawled forward, hands bloody, eyes wide and wet. "Please. I'm sorry." Lindio looked down at her, face unreadable. "I begged too," she said. No one listened. Bull reached for her ankle. Lindio stepped away. And walked into the darkness without another word. The dogs followed. The sky split open with rain. It came without warning, no gentle breeze, no scent of clouds, just a deafening clap of thunder and water spilling from the heavens in sheets. The dry earth groaned as it swallowed the flood, steam rising from the mud in ghostly plumes. Lightning flashed white, painting the compound in quick, merciless strokes of firelight and shadow. Lindio stood barefoot near the cooking hut, the old gourd in her hands. Its surface was hot now, almost trembling, and the tooth inside pulsed with every crash of thunder. Her hair clung to her face, her rags soaked through. But her eyes, those stayed sharp, open, alive. The dogs circled behind her, silent in the downpour. Mbois stepped forward and nudged the soil with her paw. A patch of ground loosened beneath the stone hearth, just beneath the hut where generations of meals had been made. Lindio bent down and began to dig. The rain helped, turning dry earth to sludge. She worked quickly, fiercely, her fingers red with clay and determination. When the hole was deep enough, she unfastened the gourd for the final time. She tipped it forward. The black liquid poured slowly, thicker than oil, gleaming as it touched the earth. It sizzled on contact, not smoke, but steam, rising in slow curls like breath from a buried mouth. The moment the last drop disappeared into the soil, the wind stopped. Completely. as if the world had exhaled and was waiting for something to breathe back. Then it came. From the mud rose a form, not flesh, not fur. Mist. Black and thick. A dog-shaped figure, massive and silent, pulled itself from the earth. Its eyes were hollow, its breath invisible, but the weight of its presence crushed the air. It did not bark. It simply stood beside Lindio, taller than Bois, thicker than any living thing should be, head tilted slightly as if listening to the past. Lindio whispered to it, "They're ready." And the figure vanished. Inside the main hut, Mama Nalika tossed in her sleep. A sharp growl cut through her dreams, jagged and too close. She opened her eyes to darkness, but not stillness. Growling. Not just one dog. Many. All around. She sat up and called for her daughters. No reply. Another growl. Then another. Closer. Deeper. She lit a small oil lamp with trembling fingers. The flame caught, throwing flickers across the mat walls. That's when she saw the first set of eyes. Outside the window. Then another. Then dozens. And some, not eyes. Just holes. As if something had gouged out light itself. She screamed. Bull and Tando burst into the room from their separate corners of the hut, faces wild with panic. "They're here!" Tando shrieked. "They're in the walls, Mama, the walls are breathing." Bull clutched her stomach. "I smell the meat, raw, why does it smell like?" The door burst open. Rain poured in. But no water touched the threshold. Only dogs. Lindio stood in the center, soaked and calm, the wind whipping around her like a cloak. Bois stood by her side. Behind them, more dogs. More shapes. Shadows with fur and bone and something else, something not born of flesh. Lindio stepped forward. The dogs didn't rush. They moved slow, deliberate. One by one, they entered the hut, each paw silent on the wet floor. Mama Nalika grabbed a pot and hurled it. It passed through one of the black mists, and clanged harmlessly against the wall. Bull backed into a corner. Tando tried to run through the side door, and froze. More dogs. There were dogs on the roof, tails curled over the edge. Dogs behind the cooking hut. Dogs in the trees, silent and waiting. No matter where they turned, eyes stared back. And some weren't dogs. Some were just teeth in darkness, shaped like wolves, but stretched too tall, mouths that never shut, with tongues that slithered like snakes. Then the attacks began. But not the way they expected. Lindio raised her hand, and the dogs pounced, not to maul, not to kill. They grabbed. Dragged. Pulled Bull and Tando toward the center of the hut. A bowl was brought in. Not the old dog bowl, a new one. But filled with something rotted. Gray, wet meat, steaming in the cold air. Flies buzzed but never landed. Bois growled low. One dog opened its mouth, and vomited a bone onto the floor. A familiar one. Small, human. Tando screamed. Lindio looked at them both. "You remember this?" she asked softly. "This is what you fed me." Bull clawed at the dirt. "Please. We were children. Mama made us." "I begged," Lindio said. "You laughed." Mama Nalika stood in the corner, frozen, shaking. "Take me instead," she croaked. "Spare them. I'll feed the dogs myself. Lindio looked at her. "You don't understand. You've already fed them." She pointed to the bowl. Then to the forest. "You have two choices. Eat from that bowl," she said. "Or run." No one moved. Lightning flashed. The shadows stirred behind the trees. Not animals. Not spirits. Something ancient. Glowing eyes. Many. Too many. Bull began to cry. "What's in the forest?" Lindio's voice was barely above a whisper. "Things that only answer hunger." The first to move was Tando. She screamed and ran, out the door, barefoot into the wet night, toward the trees. Lindio didn't look. The shadows opened. She didn't return. Bull fell to her knees. Tears mixed with rain. She picked up the bowl with shaking hands. Her lips touched the meat. She gagged. But she ate. Mama Nalika stood trembling. "What about me?" she asked, voice hoarse. Lindio stepped toward her. The black mist dog reappeared behind her. "You fed me hate," Lindio said. "Now it's full." The mist lunged. But not to bite. It swallowed her shadow. Mama Nalika dropped to the ground, convulsing, screaming silently as her shadow flailed like a second body fighting its cage. Then, nothing. She lay still. The rain slowed. Lindio turned and walked into the storm. The dogs followed. Mbwa looked back once. In the forest, the eyes blinked. And closed. The rains didn't stop for 3 days. Thunder rolled without pause, as if the sky itself mourned and rejoiced at once. Smoke rose on the third morning, thick and black, trailing into the gray clouds like an accusation. Villagers gathered at the edge of the clearing, their mouths covered, their feet hesitant. Mama Nalika's compound was gone. Ash. Only ash. No screams had been heard in the night, no cries for help, no flailing figures or running footsteps. Just smoke at dawn, and the overwhelming silence of judgment already past. Of the family, nothing remained. No bones, no cloth. Just one thing. Dogs. They sat in a perfect circle near the center of the ruin, untouched by flame. Mbwa stood in the center of them, her eyes reflecting red even in daylight. Around them, the mud was damp and cold, but not a single paw print led away from the spot. The villagers whispered. Again. She was cursed. No, she was marked. They say the girl wasn't a girl at all. But no one denied the truth of what had happened. Not now. Not after 2 fires, not after all that meat had rotted in people's mouths, not after Bull's scream still echoed faintly in dreams. And so, they built something. Not for Mama Nalika. For her. It wasn't discussed. No meeting was held. No elder gave the order. It just began, one stone placed, then another. Children helped gather the clay. Women left feathers and strips of dried hide. The men, who never once looked Lindio in the eye while she suffered, carried timber and dug trenches in the soft earth. They built the shrine beside the place where the cooking hut had once stood. Where the earth still steamed. Atop the altar, someone placed the dog skull Lindio once slept beside, the same sheet unearthed and cleaned and cradled like kin. It now sat high above the offering bowl, its carved spirals glowing faintly when the sun hit just right. People began to leave food there. Not just scraps, whole meats, roasted vegetables, sweet milk, even beads, and folded cloth. No one said what it was for. They just left things. And every morning, the bowl was empty. Not spilled. Not snatched. Just cleaned. Then came the gates. The dogs began to patrol on their own, no leash, no call. They took shifts. 2 at the southern entrance. 2 at the north. Mbwa moved freely between them all. If anyone approached with foul intention, a thief, a known liar, a man who had once beaten his wife, they didn't bark. They simply stood in the path, still as statues, until the person turned back in shame. Soon, the village elders met again, for the first time in weeks. They whispered, "Perhaps they are guarding us." And so, the dogs became something else. Not pets. Not pests. Protectors. And at the center of it all, the shrine. Some said it bled at night. Others said they heard howling inside it, even though it was just wood and stone. And then, she returned. No one saw her enter. But one evening, after the sun dipped low and the smoke from the cooking fires curled lazily across the fields, she walked through the market path. She wore animal skins, layered and stitched, forming a cloak of gray and black. Around her waist hung bones, small ones, polished and etched. Her feet were bare, her face quiet. Her eyes had changed, still sharp, still deep, but no longer confused. She held a bowl. The same one they had made her eat from. Now, it shimmered, cleaned, wrapped in bark and adorned with a single red cord. She didn't speak. She just walked slowly, dogs flanking her on either side. People stepped aside without being told. She moved from stall to stall. Some villagers trembled. But then, she held out the bowl. The seller looked down at the offering, dried fish, roasted with spice, and took one piece. A pause. Then another stepped forward. Took a bite from the bowl. And then another. Not everyone. But enough. And that night, no one fell ill. No one dreamed of teeth or shadows. No animals screamed. The moon hung heavy, but it didn't glare. And so, it became tradition. When the bowl passed through the village, you ate from it. If she held it to you, you took only what you could finish. You never took more. And you never refused. Because to refuse meant something saw you. And now, there were many things watching. The villagers began to call her something. They didn't shout it. They didn't chant it. They only whispered, to each other, in reverence, in fear, in awe. Mother of the Maw. They said she could speak to the things in the trees. That she could see through a dog's eyes. That if she ever set the bowl on your doorstep, full and waiting, it meant your last meal had arrived. But they also said this. That no child had gone missing since she returned. That thieves had stopped stealing. That husbands beat their wives less. That the air tasted cleaner. That fewer goats were lost to sickness. Linda no longer lived in a hut. She stayed somewhere deeper now, some said in a burrow beneath the old earth, others said in the forest near the altar. Wherever it was, none dared follow. But on certain nights, especially when the moon was bruised and heavy, a lone girl walked the paths of the village. A bowl in hand. And 5 dogs beside her. In the seasons that followed the fire, the village changed, not loudly, not all at once, but like a river carving its way around a stone. The shrine still stood near the ashes of Mama Nalika's old compound, only now it was overgrown with wild vines and moss, its skull darkened with time. Offerings still appeared at its base, not as often, not always meat, but they were never left forgotten. People had learned to walk carefully. Children whispered it as a game at first, late at night, when the wind made the grass hiss like snakes and the dogs barked in patterns too human. If you disrespect an orphan, they'd chant, the dogs will smell it. And they will come. But it was more than a game. One rainy evening, a traveling hunter from across the valley arrived in the village. He was tall, brash, with a skin cloak stained from kills and a mouth that didn't know the taste of quiet. He mocked the way the villagers left offerings to a skull. Laughed at the dogs that followed children like elders. When a small beggar girl asked for his leftover meat, he tossed the scraps into the mud, sneering, "Let your dead mother lick that." The next morning, he was found on the edge of the bush path, clothes torn, face scratched. Not torn enough to kill, just to humiliate. His satchel had been emptied. His plate, still at his campfire, held only flies. The meat had been taken, but only the center, as if carved with surgical hunger. He left before dusk, limping. He never returned. Since then, the villagers taught their children better. Never mock someone who has nothing. Never raise your voice near the forest edge. Never speak Lindau's name unless you mean it with respect. Because she was still there. No longer in the village. But not far. She lived deeper now, where the trees grew too thick for daylight to reach, where the moss blanketed the ground like skin. Her hut was never seen. Some said it wasn't a hut at all, but a hollow beneath an ancient tree, or a cavern guarded by beasts with no eyes. Mbwa lived with her. Always Mbwa. The dog who never aged. Her fur still black and full, her teeth unbroken, her eyes bright with that red glint. She walked beside Lindai like a shadow with its own will. Some nights, a few villagers would catch sight of them from afar. A flash of animal skins, a flicker of bone jewelry, eyes glowing through a curtain of leaves. But no one dared follow. She rarely spoke. But when she did, even chiefs went silent. She didn't shout, didn't threaten. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had eaten pain and grown teeth from it. One time, a man who had beaten his wife for years stood in her path, drunk, sneering. He called her a ghost. She stared at him until his laughter broke in his throat. That same week, he left his house, barefoot, walking into the forest. He never came back. No search party was sent. The forest had its own justice now. And still, the dogs waited. They were seen wandering through the village at dusk, noses twitching, as if checking. Watching. Testing the wind for signs of cruelty. They never barked anymore. They didn't need to. Sometimes, children followed them, placing berries or coins into the grass for the girl who eats with wolves. Sometimes, she accepted. Sometimes, she left a mark, a single print, pressed deep and alone. But no one ever saw her beg again. And when she fed, when she crouched in her den and placed meat into her bowl, hands steady, face calm, the dogs circled her in silence. They waited. Not like pets. Not like soldiers. But like worshippers. Because she no longer ate from the ground. She chose where she ate. When she ate. Who she ate with. And the dogs knew better than anyone. She never begged again. And when she feeds now, the dogs wait their turn.